Welcome to the Living Out podcast, helping people, churches and society talk about faith and sexuality. Hello and welcome to the Living Out podcast. This is the last in our series on how biblically inclusive is your church, and we've got a special guest who we'll be meeting in just a moment. My name's Anne Witten and alongside me is Andy Robinson. Andy, we've been around the country a lot recently talking to churches about being biblically inclusive. What was your favourite place that we visited and why?
Well, this is going to be quite rude, isn't it? Because various places we've visited won't get mentioned here. But I love the coast. So I have to be honest, going up the East Coast to visit Dundee recently, that was a particular highlight. And the folk up there were lovely, as indeed were the folk at Cheltenham and Colchester and Carlisle and other places that I've been to as well. But Dundee's got the East Coast, and that's a particular highlight.
Do you know, I feel like we should have conferred on this because I was going to say Dundee as well.
Okay. Scotland is winning this, isn't it?
It is, for different reasons. I mean, I am in Newcastle, so it's not too far to travel. And also, they have a high proportion of gingers, which always makes me feel really at home. So yeah, well done, Scotland. But we love visiting anywhere and everywhere, so don't let that put you off from inviting us. In this series, we're working through our church audit, looking at ways we can help make our churches places where LGBT people can thrive and follow Jesus. And in this episode, we're thinking through a couple of ways that Living Out seeks to help churches do that. And we're talking to a real-life church leader, so it's incredibly exciting. Tom Putt, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
It'd be interesting if you could tell us where you're based, what you do, what your church is like, that kind of thing.
Yeah, so I'm a vicar in the Cotswolds, so West Oxfordshire, a place called Burford, but it's a benefice of 6 churches. I'm the vicar there. I've been there nearly 3 years, and so it's gone through lockdown, and as everyone else has, but had 6 months before that. But yeah, so vicar in the lovely Cotswolds, and quite frankly, it's a glorious place to live.
So you're responsible for 6 churches?
So I'm responsible for 6 churches, but that's in 4 parishes because one of the parishes has 3 churches in it. Although I have a variety of wonderful retired clergy who help and particularly lead in one of those parishes.
Fantastic. And where were you before that? Have you moved to be there?
Yeah, so I moved from Yeovil in Somerset and was there for 4 years as an associate minister and did a curacy up in Hull. So I've moved around a bit.
You've been around a bit as well. Excellent. You can join us on the next tour. Well, it's brilliant to have you on the show, Tom. Looking forward to what you've got to say.
So, Tom, you're a church leader. You've been a church leader around the country. During those times, what are the main issues that you and the congregation have had to face when it comes to issues of sexuality?
I think it's been really broad and really wide in that I think particularly where I am at the moment, we're Burford itself is a town, although it's only 1,200 people, so it feels pretty village-like. And the other villages around, the distance between churches is quite big, and therefore the church itself is very broad because people don't often travel that much for church anyway, but actually they don't have many options. Whereas if you're in the middle of a city centre, I get the impression that if someone's not happy with a church, they can go to another one, and it's no further distance away really. So therefore we have a natural breadth that is a real joy, but is also a real challenge. And that's both a real breadth of theology, but also a real breadth in terms of life experience and a real breadth in terms of what they're expecting from a local church. Because I'm a Church of England minister, again, we have a large number who are very committed to the local church, but maybe less committed to what the church really stands for. So we have a real, and so, there are many people who would say that, Burford Church was their church, and do come and are involved. But therefore, some of the time we're dealing with issues particularly where they may not stand entirely on the same theological starting point that I would, or where the majority of the church is, and therefore that has its challenges for us, because particularly if you're doing things up front, there is a real breadth that you're talking to from a variety of starting points, and therefore there has to be a degree of care in what is said, and so therefore it's how do we make it, how do we talk about this issue around sexuality and gender, and without it being the one thing we talk about, because that's not, we want to talk about the Lord Jesus. However, aware that if we don't talk about it, then it becomes incredibly, we end up saying nothing, and people don't begin to look at what the distinctive Christian life looks like, and so therefore the challenge, because again we're living with neighbours side by side just as everyone else is, but you will see them all the time because they live next door. They're in the one shop that sells the milk, and so we bump into each other all the time, and therefore how do we commend the sacrificial Christian life that we're called to, and yet not sound horrible and unkind, which I know is true for everyone, but it really is, we really are living, side by side, and so what does that look like? How do we do that, and how do we teach it well? Because a sermon here and there, and drip feeding doesn't quite give the full. Give you option, or give you the time to say all that you want to say, or all the Bible says about it either.
That really fits with what we would love to see churches do as living out. Obviously, we don't want this to be the main thing churches talk about. Frankly, even for those of us who experience same-sex attraction, it's not the main thing we want to talk about all the time. But equally, if churches are silent, then inevitably people will just get their beliefs from the culture around them. And actually, it's not helpful for those of us who experience same-sex attraction if we don't know where the church is coming from, if we aren't getting teaching that enables us to persevere. So, as we seek to encourage churches, that sense of it's not the main thing we talk about, but we do want to make sure we talk about it from time to time is really where we would be coming from as well.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that we've been really challenged by, and certainly I've personally, as I think about how we try and teach the whole counsel of God across the year, is that whole thing that actually by not talking about it, we're not helping others who are really struggling with it, and maybe there's a danger that they then end up feeling ashamed about their struggles, and so. And actually, that was one of the things that was really helpful and challenging on the Living Out Day, was to really highlight that, and to think, actually, I'm not serving those who are experiencing same-sex attraction as well as I could be, because we're possibly more silent on it than we should be, and encouraging and supportive of that.
Yeah. Thanks, Tom. You've just mentioned the Living Out Day. I know you and several from your church came to the day that we ran in Cheltenham. For those who don't know, the Living Out Days, they're Saturdays or Saturday mornings, or sometimes we've done it as a sort of extended evening, where we cover a range of material. We cover the biblical teaching on sexuality. We reflect a little bit on the culture. We work through the church audit that has been the focus for this series of the podcast. So what was it that made you decide to come to the version we did in Cheltenham, and how did you manage to persuade some of your fellow church leaders to come along as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've been wanting to come along to one for absolutely ages, but obviously lockdown ended up preventing these sorts of things. But I think I was really aware that I knew what I thought and believed and what the Bible teaches. And I know where some of my church was, but how are we beginning to address it? The church had done a whole Saturday morning on it about 4 or 5 years ago, and so but there was a slight danger that it felt therefore like it had been done, and therefore we didn't need to do it again. And so actually begin to go, what do we need to do? How can we best do this? And recognising that, I suppose one of the particular things that highlights is that with the Church of England's Living in Love and Faith, there was deadlines coming up, and the Church of England is talking about this issue a lot at the moment. Actually, we are going to have to face it, and therefore, how are we going to face it with as Christianly and biblically, and knowing that you guys are really helpful at that. It was great to be able to go, and again, because there are people within, so it was various members of my PCC who came. They also are aware that we need to engage with the issue. We need to engage with it within the Church of England. We need to stand firm on it, but actually, we're not quite sure how to do that. And so, certainly, one or two of them, heavily involved in high level business, in their workplaces, and just trying to go, how does this sound like good news? Where do I begin? And so actually, it was a brilliant day where we began to have those conversations. And actually, as a church leader, it was wonderful that you guys were able to do it, because we could then talk about it afterwards. It was a really easy way to actually open up the subject and to go, look, actually, this is something we really want to care about. We really want to love people who are LGBT. We all know how to do that well. And let's listen to some guys who, again, I think, because personal experience is also a huge amount of what drives people's understanding of the world, actually allowing and hearing from people for whom this is a reality, a lived reality, is also very powerful. So it was great to be able to come along.
Oh, it was great to have you there. Were there any particular highlights from the day? Obviously, Anne and I were both teaching, so there's a danger with this question.
Yeah, I thought Ed's session was brilliant.
Yeah. Yes, we don't like people being nice to Ed, but more seriously, any particular highlights from the morning?
I mean, I think the whole day was really helpful because you went through various bits and pieces, the whole big picture of what marriage is for, what God's purpose for that is, that actually it's even beyond heterosexual marriage. It's about about the Lord Jesus, and again, so seeing that big picture. So for some, that really opened their eyes, because actually that's it all fits into a bigger picture. And I think there was also the Q&A session where people could ask questions. You were very honest and helpful, looking at that, but also actually looking at once we'd looked at that big picture of what the Bible says about purpose of marriage and how that fits in, actually all of a sudden there was this is why it's good news, and this is why not wanting to not looking for revision on sexuality. Actually, that's, in fact, it's important we don't, not just because we want to stand our ground and be different, but actually because it is good news. It is life affirming, and again also to help highlight. And again, I heard it before and from you guys, but again, the idea that actually we're all sexually broken, and therefore we're not just picking on a few people. Actually, this is something that we all have got wrong. And so again, I think there was that challenge for all of us that were there, that actually we're all broken in a variety of ways, and we're all broken sexually, and therefore actually it was a day where we're all leaving, repenting and trusting in Christ more, hopefully. So yeah, it was a really helpful time together.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. I think Anne and I would both say, in some ways, doing days like that, one of the highlights of the job actually is sort of getting to meet different churches, actually doing stuff as a team together. And if you're a church leader listening to this, actually, we would genuinely love to come somewhere near you. As I say, we run these, could be a morning, could be a day, where we try and do stories and testimonies as to what it's like to live as somebody same-sex attracted but who wants to be faithful to Christ. We cover Bible, we cover culture. There's chance for people to throw all their most difficult questions at us, and we do this material on how to be a biblically inclusive church. So if you'd like us to head to your area, please do get in touch with us via the sort of contact form on the website, and you will probably get a response from me at some point. So we would love to, particularly if you're from a coastal region, we would love to come to you, but we will even come to inner cities as well. In a moment, we'll reflect on the audit material and how the session on that has impacted Tom.
I just wanted to do a little plug for Ed Shaw's book, Purposeful Sexuality. It's a brilliant short read that tackles the question, what is sexuality for? He helpfully explains how sexuality points beyond itself to the relationship between God and his people, and how it can help all of us, whether married or single, to appreciate God more fully. You can read a review of Purposeful Sexuality on our website and pick up a copy for yourself, and maybe even one for a friend too. Welcome back. We're talking to Tom Putt, who's a leader in the Cotswolds. And I know that off the back of the Living Out Day that we just talked about, you're keen to take your church leadership through what we call the Living Out Church Audit, which is the 10-point checklist that we've been exploring in this podcast series. Perhaps you could tell us, first of all, why you decided that would be a good thing for your church to go through.
Yeah, I mean, I think the big thing is that I think we all have blind spots. And I think, quite frankly, we've got blind spots all over the place. And to have an opportunity to think about, where they are for us on this particular issue, I think, one of the things we've done is we went through the Living in Love and Faith course as a PCC, and I think, everyone wanting to stick to the Bible's teaching, but what does it look like to love LGBT people? How is it good news? But also, are there ways in which we're just not doing it very well, where we're not caring for people, we're not being as welcoming and as hospitable and, I suppose, biblically inclusive as we should be? And wanting to go through the audit with the church, and particularly with the PCC, to look at how do we do this, and to highlight actually where we are failing to love other people. So we've recently kind of outlined what our three purposes are for a church, and the second one is about loving his people, and therefore this is a big part of it, because actually, as I went through the audit, not only is it about loving LGBT people, but it's also about just loving people. And recognizing, it's about recognizing, we're all in the image of God, and we all struggle in a variety of ways, and often we can be very focused on a particular group, or 2 or 3 groups who naturally fit in, and therefore it's a challenge to us to kind of really look at ourselves and go, are we as welcoming, are we as hospitable, are we as open as we should be?
Was there any kind of resistance amongst the leadership to actually going through this process, or were people largely on board? And kind of how have you sort of practically done it? Are you looking at a few questions each week, or are you, as a leadership getting together to discuss these things, or are you involving people in the wider church? It'd be interesting to just hear the practical dynamics of that.
Yes, in terms of the practical things, so we went through LLF and we did that over about 6 weeks, and we gave an hour and a half, 6 evenings, going through the Church of England material, of which there was some really good conversation. And so from that, to then going, we now need to move on and go, okay, what do we do? How do we love people? And so we were going to do it last month in a PCC meeting, but actually that's not going to be long enough. And so we're arranging a time later on in the summer where we can go through it, and we'll try and do it. We'll try and do it all in an evening. We'll send the survey out in advance. People can think about it. We'll try to do it in an evening, recognizing that's the beginning of the conversation. And we've got various different ministry teams that we've kind of set up around different areas of church life. And again, we'll get them to have a little look at it as well and go, okay, how is this impacting our welcome? How is this impacting our children's and youth ministry? How is this impacting our outreach? And just begin to ask those sorts of questions, and try and come up with some helpful answers, and try and put these things in place, because some of the questions I think are quite challenging, and I think we fail on those things. There are other things where I think we're doing all right, but I'm possibly not the right person to ask. I think there are a few people in the congregation who I need to ask specifically, actually, what's your impression? And actually, what's your experience of this? And so I think, so the intention will be to start with sort of PCC one evening, and then in these little ministry teams, and just slowly begin to move it out and go, look, these are some sensible questions to ask ourselves, because we want to be wholeheartedly committed to following the Lord Jesus Christ, but we also want to be as totally open and loving and welcome as the Lord Jesus himself is. We want to be orthodox on both sides of that, and so yes, that's the challenge, and that's how we're hoping to roll it out and begin to, so that it becomes part of who we are rather than a policy. That's where we're going anyway.
That's great, because we don't want it to be just a sort of exercise that people do to tick something on a list and then go back to business as usual. So looking down the list of the 10 questions there, you mentioned that there'll be some challenges. Are there particular ones that jump out of you that you think, yeah, this is going to be tough for our church, or we're not quite getting this one right?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are. I mean, some of them, like I said, I think we're probably doing better than others, but I think talking about the fact that we all experience sexual brokenness, that's not necessarily a phrase that we would particularly have used before, and again, when talking about sacrificial, Christian living, I think we are calling people to radical and sacrificial. But I wonder whether it doesn't feel like that. So we talk about finances. We talk about a few weeks ago we talked about anger as being something that we really need to kind of address. But I wonder whether it doesn't feel as sacrificial because it's still probably slightly more acceptable than what that it effectively. Against a culture that says something totally different. Whereas I think if we were to consider our material, sacrificially, actually we live in a very materialistic world, don't we? And actually the idea in the wonderful leafy Cotswolds, there's some really sacrificial responses, and some are incredibly sacrificial. Now, obviously, as vicar, I have no idea how much anyone gives. I deliberately keep myself away from that. But actually, what does that look like? I think whilst we think we're trying to apply the Bible and trying to encourage people to sacrificial Christian living in a variety of areas, my guess is it might not feel like we are, and it may not be heard in the same way. And so how we do that without sort of piling on the guilt to people is a real challenge. And something that requires some time to think through. I think the big thing really is whilst we're trying to develop our loving one another, whilst we are a small town, a lot of people come from 10-15 miles away as well, and so come into us, and therefore how we naturally open up our homes, how we naturally just share our lives with those who aren't naturally like us. I think that's one of the challenges. I think particularly, what does it look like to be single? What does it look like to be young and single in our area? There aren't many of them. And actually, we need to strengthen and improve how we care for everyone and not just particular groups, whether it be families or whether it be another group over there. There's a group who look after each other very, very well, and which is brilliant. But actually, how do we do that with those who are from different backgrounds and life situations? Is something that we've got to work on quite hard, and in some respects that's almost separate from the LGBT issue. But actually, how that is what we've got to be able to do amongst ourselves in order to make sure that we are supporting and to enable people to live that radical Christian life and to be called to live a faithful life when they're same-sex attracted. We've got to be doing these things naturally, so it doesn't just feel like we've got one person who's looking after a few people who need particular help. It needs to be our culture, not just a interest group, I suppose. And so, so that's a challenge. And I think, again, around, I hope we don't talk about marriage being more important than singleness. But again, we probably talk about marriage more than singleness.
I don't think you're alone in that.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. I seem to remember there was a book that came out when I was at university called "If Singleness is a Gift, What's the Return Policy?" I never read the book, but I think the title, I think is often what it seems like within church life, and therefore, I think that's the challenge for us: is how do we live out this Christian ethic throughout all of our church life? And these questions particularly challenge us on that. And so, and then I suppose as we look particularly at how we address LGBT and how we teach faithfulness, as I mentioned, we're quite a broad church. We have various different villages, and again, within the churches that we have, there are 2 larger services, but there are 6 smaller ones. Which would be more traditional, and equally seeking to be faithful, but how we talk about that and how we encourage faithfulness, whilst recognising that people are from very different positions and starting points. So I think we'd want to do that. I think we don't quite know how we're going to do that well and carefully. Recognising that it'd be very, very easy to upset one person in one village, and that's ministry becomes incredibly hard in that one village for the next 30 years. And so, but also recognising, and I think again, the Living Out Day was really helpful for it, that actually, but if we're not saying it, and there's someone who is trying to live a faithful Christian life in that village, and we're not telling them and supporting them and encouraging them, actually we're not doing them any favours either. And actually there's a degree of unfaithfulness in our part in caring for our brothers and sisters in those situations. So it's trying to get that balance. It's trying to be brave, and it's trying to be loving.
It's so wonderful to hear your heart behind doing this, that, clearly what you want for your church is to be able to love everybody, welcome everybody, to be able to teach the truth faithfully in a way that it really gets down into people's hearts and lives, and actually make it plausible to live that out as well. I think that there's 2 things that I find really encouraging. I think first of all, the fact that you said it's about deepening discipleship for everybody, isn't it? It's not just these LGBT people need a bit of special help, or they need a special challenge or whatever. Actually, one of our dreams for the audit is that it draws everybody closer to Jesus. It helps everybody confront the things in their life that they're not handing over to him, and it helps make the church community a place where everybody can thrive and recognise that we're all in the same boat. There's no sort of grades of sin, and some people are worse than others and that kind of thing. So it's brilliant to hear that it has already sort of served you in that way. And also just to hear you working it out in your context, which is very different from the context that other church leaders, big city church is going to be very different to yours. But it's really helpful to hear you kind of grapple with, how does this work in our context? What are the particular challenges that we have? And yeah, I mean, we would love to sort of keep in touch with you as you go through the process and find out what you're learning, and because you'll end up being more of an expert than us. So it's great. Then we can nick all your ideas and put them on the website and help other people. So yeah, massively encouraging. Is it just as we conclude, is there any advice that you would give to other church leaders who perhaps aren't as far on in the process as you, maybe haven't even started to open up a conversation about sexuality? What would you say to them?
I think the reality is that I think I wanted to slightly bury my head in the sand, and just hope that it, and actually I think the big challenge has been that actually we're not serving the same-sex attracted Christian well if we're not teaching them, encouraging them, and almost making it feel like they're a dirty secret. And therefore, we need to, and actually we are holding out good news to the world. It is good news for our communities, and we can still love and be incredibly generous towards our LGBT friends who are not Christian, who are struggling with these things, and welcome them and love as Christ loved. But we do need to talk about it, and we need to. It might be that you start with 2 or 3 people to begin with, and go, okay, how am I going to make a difference within my church to begin with? And then actually, how does that roll out across the leadership? How does that roll out across our culture? And this is a cultural move that has taken what it seemed to be very quick, but it's been going on for years. And actually, it's going to take, it may well take a long time to better get our culture into the right place, within church life. But it's got to start somewhere, and it should start with us. If we want to be faithful Christian people, we need to begin with ourselves. And so I think I'd encourage us to do it. And actually, it's a wonderful privilege to think about how we can help God's people. And it's a challenge for us as individuals, because actually, as I said, as we open up how we care and support within the LGBT community, we're also thinking about how we care for lots of other people as well. So yeah, I can highly recommend it, and let's pray that we keep going with it.
Well, that's all for today's episode of the Living Out podcast. Thank you so much, Tom, for joining us. We've
Pleasure.
Really appreciated having you here. Thank you. And thanks to everybody who's been listening. That's the end of our current series, but I would encourage you to share it with your churches, to download the audit for free from the website, and to go through the process for yourselves. The next series is going to be another set of Meet the Authors interviews, and we have some brilliant guests lined up, so do subscribe so that you don't miss an episode. And remember to visit our website, livingout.org, for loads of great free resources. Bye for now.